Welcome to our Monday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing a series that I started last week talking about Joseph from the Old Testament. And I've got this teaching entitled Lessons from Joseph. Joseph is one of my favorite characters, and I tell you, I said a lot of things last week that would really be a blessing to you. So if you've missed any of this, or even if you've watched these programs, I encourage you to please get the materials that we're offering, because this is just profound, the things that we're saying. Last week we dealt primarily with Genesis chapter 37, where God revealed His plans for Joseph's life through two dreams. And in Psalms 105 verse 19 it says that this was the word of the Lord that came unto him. And until that word came to pass, that same word that God had given him is what tried him or kept him purified and focused on this. And so we talked last week about how important a dream is. You've got to have a goal, a purpose for your life. If you're shooting at nothing, you'll hit it every single time. But in order for you to reach your full potential, you've got to get a revelation of what God's will is. I've got a series that I just taught recently on our television program entitled How to Find, Follow, and Fulfill God's Will. And we had a lot of materials, a book on that, CDs, DVDs, a study guide. We had DVDs with other people's testimonies about how they've discovered God's will. And we've got a lot of materials on our website. You could go and check that out. On last Friday's program, I began to start talking about after Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery and he wound up in Egypt. This verse in Genesis chapter 39 verse 2 is just one of my favorite verses. God has really spoken this to me. And it says, "And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian." Did you know most people would think, if you're a slave, how could you ever call somebody who's a slave to another person prosperous? I'm telling you, God doesn't evaluate things the way that we do. We've accepted definition of prosperity as being things, recognition from people, and it's all of these earthly things that are subject to change. But what true prosperity is the favor of God. That's a huge statement right there. But I believe that to be absolutely true. And did you know you've got to believe that you have the favor of God, the blessing of God on your life before you see it manifest in these things. You've got to see it on the inside before you'll see it on the outside. There is a great truth here. Man, I could spend weeks teaching on this. Matter of fact, I've got a series entitled Blessings and Miracles. I think that same teaching has also been called How to Receive God's Best. But anyway, it's talking about how that God has blessed us. And if you would mix that with faith, then these blessings of God begin to manifest in your life. And I hadn't got time to go back and prove all this to you, but I'm just going to say that this blessing of God, the favor of God that was on Joseph, did not happen without his cooperation. Joseph had to cooperate. A verse that I used last week, Ephesians 3:20, it says, "Now unto Him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all we ask or think, according to the power that works in us." God's ability is tied to the power that works in you. It's not us doing it without Him, but God doesn't move in us and through us without our cooperation. God doesn't force Himself upon us. It's according to the power that works within you. And so the results that is described here in the 39th chapter of the book of Genesis didn't come without Joseph's cooperation. Joseph was believing God. He had two dreams from God that he was going to be exalted. His brothers and even his father would come and bow down to him. And because of that, Joseph mixed faith with it, and even though he was sold into slavery, which looked completely opposite to the dream that was in his heart, he was still believing God. It's not over till it's over. If you are going to really succeed, you are going to have to get to a place to where you can see yourself succeeding when everything in the natural looks contrary. I've shared a lot of my testimony with you about that. And you know what? That has brought me through times of hardship. I bet you it was at least 1 decade, probably 2 decades before anybody on the outside could see any visible effect of the things that God had spoken in my heart. But before others could see it, I saw it. I saw it in my heart. I saw that God was going to use me and that I was going to reach large numbers of people. But I mean, for nearly 2 decades, you couldn't have proven it by anything that was going on in my life. But I saw it. If you are going to see God use you, you are going to have to look beyond your physical circumstances and see things by faith. Do you know, right now we're in a circumstance where most of you have heard me talk about this, that we have a property up in Woodland Park, Colorado, where we're building our Charis Bible College campus. We've already spent $32 million on acquiring the property, all of the infrastructure, and building the first building. We're now 60% through with our second building. Altogether, I have spent in 6 years about $50 million above and beyond our normal expenses. I mean, it's miraculous. But did you know that over Christmas, we ran into a situation where we just had put out so much money on this construction that we weren't able to pay our normal bills, payroll and things like this. And rather than make people who we owed money to, our employees and some of our vendors and things like that, rather than not pay them, which I am just adamant that we pay everybody the day that something is due, I had a check run. We were $1.9 million short. And because of that, I actually had to use a line of credit that our bank has extended to us to cover those checks. But I refuse to run this ministry on credit. And so I have completely shut down all of the construction that's going on this building. Now, by the time you see this program, I believe that everything will be totally resolved and we'll be back to construction. But at the time I'm making this program, I don't know how long it's going to take me to pay back this $1.9 million. It was actually $2 million line of credit that we drew down, but I'm going to pay it back in a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever it takes, and I'm going to pay it back, and then I'm going to build up a reserve so that we won't be, right on the verge and all of this. So anyway, the reason I say all of these things is to say that, in the natural right now, I've had to stop construction. The first time in 6 years that I've had to stop construction, we have been putting out money on a monthly basis for 6 years, and we've built $50 million worth of stuff. I still have about another $20 million to go to get this building finished. And you know what? I could sit here and in the natural, I could be looking at it and think, oh God, this is terrible, and I could be looking at all of the effort that it's going to take to restart the construction. People just can't, they aren't just sitting there waiting on me to give the word. Some of them will go get other jobs, and it may take a while for me to get these subs back and to do all of these kind of things. I could sit here and look at all of the negatives and talk about all of this, and I could be discouraged. But you know what? I can truthfully say there is not 1 ounce of discouragement in me. I mean, I just look at it this way. We've already spent $50 million in 6 years above my normal expenses, which are close to $3 million a month. And on top of all of that, I've spent $50 million. How can I look back and see that God has brought us this far and He's not going to continue and bring us the rest of the way? I am totally encouraged. And so there's negative things in my life, just like there was negative things in Joseph's life. Here he was being sold into slavery, but he had a word from God. And I believe he was still encouraged and he was still operating in faith. You can see that by his attitude, the things that happened. I can tell you that that's happening with me. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know how long it's going to take, but you just hide and watch. We will get everything done that God has told me to do. I believe that with all of my heart. This is not an appeal for anything. I'm just telling you right now that this is something I'm walking through, and examples just like this. Joseph was the blessed of the Lord. But if you didn't have any faith in the word that was given unto him, if you weren't looking into the future, if you were just evaluating things by what it was like at that exact moment in the natural, he didn't look like he was the blessed of the Lord. He didn't look like he's a prosperous man. But the Bible says that he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. You may be in a situation where you're working for somebody else. You may be in a situation where things don't look good right now, but can you look past that and see the dream that God has put in your heart? Can you walk by faith, or are you just going to walk by sight? Everybody wants to talk about faith, but faith is the ability to see things with your heart that you can't see with your physical eyes. You need to see yourself prosperous. You need to see your marriage working. You need to see your body healed. You need to see these things coming to pass. In verse 3 it says, "And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand." Boy, I like that. You know, God has given us the promises in Deuteronomy chapter 28 that He would bless the work of our hands. Whatever you set your hand unto will prosper. I've actually told people before that if you hire me, if you let me do something, I said you will be blessed because of it. Some people look at that as arrogance. And it could be arrogance. A person could say things like that, but I'm not saying it arrogantly. I'm saying it because it's what I believe. I believe that the blessing of God is on me. I'm like a cork. You take me to the bottom of the lake and I will rise again. The blessing of God is on me, and I know it. And because of it, I believe that I'm going to prosper. I don't care what happens. I don't care about, if we had to shut construction down for a brief period of time, it's just a delay at the very worst. It's not going to last. I'm blessed. And I guarantee you the blessing of God is going to continue to manifest itself in my life. I believe that. Joseph believed it. And so it says in verse 4, "And Joseph found grace in his sight," talking about his master, the Potiphar, the Egyptian. "And he served him and made him overseer over his house, and all that he did he put into his hand. And it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in his house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught that he had save the bread which he did eat, and Joseph was a goodly person and well favored." Boy, this is amazing. Here's a slave that, in most people's mindset, you couldn't be a slave if there wasn't something wrong with you, if you weren't inferior or something like that. And yet this man saw the favor of God on Joseph to such a degree that he put everything he had. He was a very wealthy man, and he put all of his finances, all of his dealings, all of his transactions, all of his servants, everything under the hand of Joseph. I guarantee you, you do not do that unless you see and have faith in a person, that this is a person of character, a person of integrity. And I can guarantee you Joseph, that would not have been seen in him if he would have been just griping and complaining and talking about, "Woe is me, look how bad my situation is." I'm saying this, brothers and sisters, we're trying to learn lessons from Joseph, and one of the lessons that we all need to learn, it has impacted me, and I'm praying that it's impacting you, is that even though you may have things in your life that are contrary to what God has spoken to you, what you believe God's will for you is, you are going to have to get over it, and you are going to have to just start being faithful wherever you are. In the 16th chapter of the book of Luke, Jesus gave this parable about the unjust steward, and then He said, "He that is faithful in least is faithful in much." If you haven't been faithful in another man's, who's going to give unto you your own riches? And there are some of you that right now are struggling, but you're working for somebody else and you aren't giving them a full day's wage. You aren't doing things with excellence. There are some of you that, if you're supposed to be there at 8 o'clock, you get there at 8:05. If you're supposed to leave at 5 o'clock, you leave at 4:55. You take 5 or 10 minutes on either side. When you have a break for 10 minutes, you'll take your break and then go to the restroom and get another 5 minutes. You will sit there and take pencils and pens and things like this. And I know some of you think, well, those are small things. But I can guarantee you, people who prosper like Joseph and stuff, it's because they do everything that they do heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. Let me read this passage to you from Ephesians chapter 6. This is talking about slaves, how they're supposed to serve their master. And of course, in this time, this was actually talking about actual slavery. Today, we don't have slavery in our culture like what was talking about here in the Bible, but we still have a servant and like an employer and employee type of relationship. And here's some of the admonitions that Paul gave to the people in Ephesus under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ, not with eye service, as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord, and not to man, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free." This is saying that we need to do things with all of our heart as if we are serving Christ, and not eye service as man pleasers. What this is talking about is you don't just work hard when the boss is looking. You work hard when the boss isn't looking. You do it as unto the Lord. And whether people ever recognize you or not, don't worry about it. You trust God. God will recognize you. It says, whatever good thing you do, you will receive from the Lord, whether he be bond or free. I'm telling you, I've seen this work out in my life. I've seen people bless me because I was working hard as unto the Lord, not unto that man. I'm convinced that if you took me and if some reason everything changed and if I had to go get a job at McDonald's, I guarantee you I'd work harder than anybody else. I'd give them 120% of my effort. I would work so hard, and I can guarantee you within a short period of time I'd be running that McDonald's, I'd be managing it, I'd become the owner, I would prosper. Not because of me, but because of God's favor on me. But in order for that favor to be manifest, it says over here in Genesis chapter 39 that Potiphar saw that God was with Joseph. He wasn't just told this, it's something he observed because Joseph was operating in excellence and doing everything he did with all of his heart. Let me just ask you, is that the way that your boss sees you? Does your boss see you coming in late, leaving early, taking extra time for breaks? Does your boss see you taking, pens and pencils and paper clips and things home? I know some of you think those are small things, but it adds up. Do you know right now we have just under 500 employees worldwide? And I certainly don't know every single one of our employees, and I don't know everything that's going on, but I observe attitudes. And there has been times in the past that, somebody who was in a management position, a supervisor position, moved on, and it was time to bring somebody up, and so they asked me, and you know what? I have opinions. And there's been times that they've asked me, well, what do you think about this person taking over? And I said, nope. And I just observe that, you know what, they're slothful in some things. And you may think, well, that's not fair. No, it is fair. You deal with a person, and I don't want to promote a bad attitude. I don't want to promote somebody who comes in 5 minutes late and leaves 5 minutes early and things like this. I don't want to promote that kind of attitude, and I don't want to put them into a leadership position where that same attitude will be passed down through the rest of things. You may not realize it, but your superiors over you, they are paying attention, and if you give your all, if you do it like it says over here in Ephesians chapter 6, not with eye service as man pleasers, but if you do it as unto the Lord, people will notice. They will notice. I had a situation where there was a woman in a hospital room, and she was just desperate, and out of desperation, she saw my program, heard some teaching. She checked herself out of the hospital. She got a taxi, and the doctors told her, you can't do this, you're dying. She was terminal. And she checked herself out against their wishes, got a taxi, came to the meeting, and came forward and got born again. She wasn't even born again. And yet she got so touched. She came, she got born again, baptized in the Holy Spirit. And anyway, over a year's time or something like this, she just began to grow in the Lord and begin to prosper. She got totally healed. She had a job. And the next time I came to town, this woman wanted to skip out on her job and come to the meeting, but instead she felt obligated. She was doing things with excellence to that employer. So she went to her job on Friday morning, and her employer called her in and said, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't even like you. He wasn't a Christian, and he took issue with her Christianity and the way she was living it and proclaiming it on her job. And he said, I don't even like you, but I'm giving you a raise of $200 a month, $2,400 a year. And while he was talking to her, she says, I know why you're promoting me, because I'm blessed of God and your business is blessed, and because I'm here. And she was saying these exact same things as I'm saying. And did you know that while her boss was talking to her, he says, I'm going to give you another $200 a month raise from his account, not from his superiors, but out of his account. So anyway, she got a total of $4,800 a year raise just because she was faithful. The blessing of God was upon her. Man, I think that's awesome. Did you know what? If you have the power of the Holy Spirit in you, what's happening here with Joseph should happen to every born-again believer. If you're working for somebody, man, you ought to be blessing that business. You ought to be working with excellence, not as eye service, as man pleasers, but doing it from your heart. And I guarantee you, God will reward you. You know, the COO of our ministry, he's now got his own corporations, and he's got over 1,200 employees in another thing besides my ministry that he's running here. But at one time, he was working for a man. He came up with these ideas, and his boss took his ideas and took credit for it. And because of it, he got promotions and he got bonuses. And Paul Milligan, the man who's my COO, rather than gripe, rather than complain, he just decided, I am going to continue. I'm going to do this as unto the Lord. And if my boss takes credit for it, so be it. I'm going to make him the most successful person. And he did that for a couple of years. And finally, the boss that was over his boss came to him and asked him, says, are you the one that came up with this idea and this idea and this idea? And he said, yes. And he said, we thought so. He says, your boss isn't smart enough to do this. And we started looking and found out it was you. And they promoted him above his boss and gave him the control over that. And it took a couple of years, but you know what? It's just like Ephesians chapter 6 says. If you will do things with your whole heart, as unto the Lord and not unto man, that good thing that you've done, you will receive regardless of who you are. Whether you are the lowest person on the totem pole, whether you are the least paid and least recognized person, it will eventually come to the top. It'll be recognized. But the sad thing is, many Christians, when they aren't treated properly, when something doesn't go right, they just sit there and sulk. They quit doing service. They are actually doing it just for the recognition of people. And if that person passes over them, they think, what's the use? You should be doing it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto man. And if you would get that attitude, the attitude that Joseph had right here, I guarantee you, you'd get the same results that Joseph got right here.